Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on how the EU REACH regulation is going to change under the CSS, so the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. So today we have three experts providing the presentation today. So Tim, if you will introduce yourself briefly, and then Steve, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Tim Becker. I'm a senior legal advisor with REACHLaw. Have been with the company for more than 10 years now. So my specialties are clearly on the EU REACH regulation and related EU legislation such as Waste Framework Directive, SCIP requirements. Main aspects of my work include the legal advice, regulatory monitoring, and also advocacy support. And the clients assisted range all the way from chemicals manufacturers down to end users of chemicals. And I have especially a strong track record in aerospace and defense sector.
Thank you, Tim. Steve, please.
Hello, my name is Steve George. I've got 33 years in the aerospace industry in supply chain engineering and customer requirements management matters. I've been involved in REACH regulations since 2010. I was previously chair of the Aerospace and Defence Industries REACH Working Group for about 10 years. And now I am a senior advisor with REACHLaw and a director of REACHLaw UK.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm Fredrik Johansson. I'm a partner and head of sales at REACHLaw, have a background in chemistry and have worked on chemical regulatory topics since 2004, even before REACH came into force, and also other EHS topics. And I'll be the moderator for this webinar. So just some practical information regarding the webinar. So you can send in questions using the chat function, and we've already received some questions ahead of the webinar, so we'll take those in the Q&A section, but also those that will be sent using the chat. So we'll try to go through those as much as possible. And we'll provide a recording of this webinar, and actually we will also post it on our YouTube channel, which I'll just speak about in a few slides, just briefly. And of course, in any case, please feel free to send us feedback. We appreciate that very much. And it also helps us, obviously, to develop our content. So the agenda for today will be a packed one. We have around 60 minutes to go through this. So I'll just give you an overview of REACHLaw. So give you a REACHLaw brief. And then let's look at why the REACH revision was initiated, the current status thereof, and the extension to registrational obligations of this revision, and then the authorization restriction reform, look at essential use concept, which we also received some questions on ahead of the webinar, then an outlook on and actions for companies as a result of this, before heading over to the Q&A section. So we'll try to contribute quite a lot to the Q&A, but let's see how the time flows. But anyway, just some quick disclaimers. So of course, any actions you may take based on this presentation is of course at your own responsibility and risks. So please familiarize yourself with this disclaimer if you want to look at the detailed legal texts. Won't go into details here. Okay, REACHLaw in brief. So who are we? So we provide support for EU REACH and EU REACH-like chemical regulations globally. So this obviously encompasses now also the UK REACH regulation, the Turkey KKD-IK regulation, which both are in force, then also the Eurasia REACH regulation that is coming into force a bit later on, as well as the Indian REACH regulation, which is also not yet in force, but will be. But also the K-REACH regulation, which is already, of course, in force in South Korea. So we provide a full set of services related to these regulations. And of course, today focus will be EU REACH and the revision thereof. But just to mention briefly, the scope of services goes from the more normal, let's say, co-registration services to the more demanding lead registration and authorization services, as well as, of course, providing consultancy on various topics such as the CSS REACH revision. That will be the topic of today. We'll not go into the details here. We'll save the time for the Q&A. But if you have any questions, of course, on REACHLaw services, please feel free to contact us at any time. So just wanted to also highlight that we have a slew of worldwide offices. The head office is, of course, here in Finland, in Helsinki, or Espoo to be precise, which is very close to Helsinki. Then the UK office, that's where Steve comes from, and we provide support for UK REACH services, such as only representative services. The same goes for the Istanbul office, where we provide, for example, only representative services for KKDRK purposes, and so on. So we try to natively support all these important EU REACH-like chemical regulations in the jurisdictions they're applicable to, and thus also try to have our local offices there to provide local support. So we really specialize in chemical regulations and regulatory consultancy, and also sustainability to a certain degree. It's nowadays it's a niche, but it's quite a broad niche, as we have come to understand, and you can see from the scope of different regulations. But as I mentioned in the beginning, we also have a YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks. I invite you to have a look. We will post most of our webinars there, and we post dedicated content for the YouTube channel, such as, for example, Tim had a recent post on this CSS and the REACH revision also, so you can have a look at that. But also this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel for easy access for anyone, of course. And before we go into the topic for today, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of where we are with the different regulations that we are supporting. So for the UK REACH, if you start at the left, so late doing notifications are still possible, and there's currently discussion ongoing about the postponement of the first and maybe the next also registration deadlines with a few years. This is still work in progress, and we'll see how things develop. But generally, some lead registration dossiers have already been prepared and even submitted, so work is really progressing for UK REACH. The same can be said for KKDRK, where we have also, it is still possible to late pre-register substances in the UK. It was called a late doing, but in the KKDRK regulation, it's called pre-registration and late pre-registration. So if you haven't done that, then you place chemicals on the Turkish market, then that is still an option for you. But other than that, the lead registration work is starting. Some lead dossiers have even been submitted, and the co-registration phase is about to begin. And of course, all registrations need to be submitted by end of 2023, so end of next year. For India REACH, the regulation is not yet in force, but there's been discussion about having that enter into force this year. But of course, there may be further delays, so we're following that very, very closely. And the same tone goes for the Eurasia REACH regulation, which is expected to enter into force at the end of next year. There are some second-tier implementing regulations that will be approved later this year, as well as some GOST standards, but we're also following the developments there. For K-REACH, they're a bit more further ahead, where the first registration deadline actually passed end of last year for the higher tonnage bands and the CMR substances at 1 ton or more, and the next one is for 2024, end of 2024, for 100 to 1,000 ton substances. So things are progressing at the K-REACH front. So that was just a quick global regulatory update before now heading over to why was the REACH revision initiated, and I will hand over to my colleague Tim, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Freddy. Okay, so I shall start with a short recap on why was a REACH revision initiated. Then I will reflect a bit on the current status of the project, which is run by the European Commission. And then under point 4, I will discuss a little bit the extension to the registration obligations before handing over to Steve to go a little bit more into the detail on the authorization and restriction reform and the essential use concept. And then at the end, we have some summary outlook and action proposals for companies. And we shall have some time, at least 15 minutes, for questions and answers. So why was a REACH revision initiated? So the REACH revision is an action from the EU Chemicals Strategy for Sustainability. So as most of you know, this is a communication by the European Commission towards a toxic-free environment. This communication was published in October 2020, and this CSS is part of the EU's zero pollution ambition, which is a key commitment of the European Green Deal. The CSS includes a comprehensive action list of currently over 80 actions that the Commission wants to take already from last year until 2024. And yeah, and in the present context of REACH, the CSS basically sets out that a targeted revision of the REACH regulation should be undertaken, and the Commission wants to prepare a legal proposal by the end of this year. And if we look at the proposed changes a little bit in detail now, we will see that the planned amendments could have a significant impact indeed on the industries. So now we have achieved a major milestone, which is the Commission open public consultation, which is about 3 months long and will close on the 15th of April. And so I will also give you a brief overview of the scope of this consultation. But first of all, I'd like to highlight a bit the scope of the REACH revision. So as already said, according to the Commission, it's a targeted REACH revision, targeted to the objectives of the CSS. So the REACH revision is based on a number of problems that have been identified with the current REACH implementation. Especially there have been a lot of gaps in the knowledge of many substances. Then combination effects of chemicals are not addressed. Supply chain communication has been somewhat inefficient. And then some hiccups and difficulties have been encountered with the various follow-up processes to registration. So evaluation, authorization, and also restriction. And also on control and enforcement, it has been observed that it is not equally effective in all the member states. So based on this problem definition, basically the proposed measures now for the REACH revision, they mirror the problems identified. So basically, the Commission would like to propose changes to pretty much all the core processes under REACH. So be it registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction. And in addition, it would also like to propose some measures to simplify supply chain communication. And here we talk in particular about the safety data sheets and introducing harmonized electronic formats. On control and enforcement, there is the plan to introduce a European audit capacity with new powers of the Commission to strengthen the enforcement and the level playing field regarding REACH in the member states. And but I will not go further into detail on this aspect today, because we focus more on the issues of direct impact now to the industry. Last but not least, the REACH revision roadmap, which was actually from last year. It also gives a high-level summary of the preliminary impacts of this planned REACH revision on industry, society, health, and environment. So, and whereas this is all based, the whole REACH revision is firmly based on the CSS, the plans now unfolding really show that the REACH revision even goes beyond the elements of the CSS in some aspects. For example, if we look at the evaluation process and also for example, the definition of intermediates, which is not something that is mentioned in the CSS. So the Commission really wants to take the opportunity here to clean up the regulation, as they say, and take this once in a decade opportunity to make changes. Now, what is the current status of the REACH revision? So I give you a brief overview of the timeline. So we are now pretty much in the middle of the process. Beginning of 22, a number of supporting actions and studies have been launched by the Commission already last year. So they are all ongoing at the moment. A consultation on the roadmap that I just introduced to you was already conducted last May. Receiving many supplies from stakeholders. Now we have, as I said, the open public consultation, 12 weeks until the middle of April, which is a very important opportunity for stakeholders to provide input. In addition, there are a number of parallel targeted consultations and stakeholder workshops, and stakeholders are also invited to contact the Commission directly, also via email, to provide input and show readiness to contribute. So all this input and studies is feeding into the Commission's impact assessment, which is already running and which the Commission wants to complete by this summer, latest September this year. And based on this, a proposal will be drafted for the revision of REACH, which will be also subject to the review by the Commission's Regulatory Scrutiny Board. And then the adoption of the proposal is planned by the end of this year. And then the proposal will be handed over to the Parliament, European Parliament, and the Council for processing and adoption of the REACH revision. And we could see that this process could be completed by around about 2025, and for the new changes to take effect to 25 to 2027. You should also note that there is a parallel CLP revision ongoing, and here the revision proposal is already expected a bit earlier this year, in the second half of 22. So further information on the REACH revision is available on the Commission website. A few words about the open public consultation, which is now running on the REACH revision. So the Commission has published a questionnaire. It is quite extensive. It has 40 pages and 51 questions. Both general questions and also expert questions, which are flagged in red. And in addition to these questions, where you basically have to select answers, you can also upload separate files. So we would recommend that you really take the opportunity to not only tick the answers to the questions, but also provide your rationale for the answers and support any demands and views that you have by uploading additional position papers. So currently this consultation is available in English, and but the Commission is also now planning a translation into all EU languages by the middle of the month. Then a brief overview of the supporting studies for the impact assessment. So it really shows you how ambitious the REACH revision project is. So first of all, you have a number of studies that are more or less addressing the the proposed changes to the registration process. I don't want to go into the details, just to give you an overview of what's being studied at the moment. Then the second set of studies, also of high interest, is the study revising the authorization and restriction provisions, and then the study on developing the essential use concept. So Steve will talk more about that. And last but not least, we have also two studies relating to the area of control and enforcement and the introduction of the European audit capacity, as I mentioned. So as you see, some studies are already completed, but the majority of the studies are still ongoing. And on top of that, we also have a work package providing the Commission with overall support to the impact assessment. So now a few words about the extension to the registration obligations. So there are a number of aspects to that. The first one is that registration requirements of certain polymers of concern should be introduced. As you know, today, polymers are exempted from registration, and also there is a very little public data available on the hazard properties and other basic information of the polymers. So a contractor has already undertaken a study for DG Environment, which was completed back in 2020, to identify some polymers requiring registration, PRR. So that would be candidates for registration because of their hazards. And on the other hand, we have the polymers of low concern, which would then not need to be registered. The current candidates for polymers to be registered are, you can find in the consultation questionnaire. I have reflected them here on the slide. And there are many questions and challenges around the polymer registration, and discussions are ongoing on issues such as substance identity, grouping, information requirements, and so on. And also there is the idea to have a requirement like a notification step for industry to report the polymer's status in a first step to ECHA, which would then be used further, as we know it from the pre-registration under REACH. We would be used also for industry to get in contact with each other, enable joint registration, and so on. So there is a Caracal subgroup for polymers, which is still ongoing to finalize the plans for the registration proposal for polymers. Then the second aspect of the extension of registration obligations is the information on substances marketed at the lowest tonnage level. So here it has been observed that currently there's very limited information and no CSR requirement for lower volume substances, and therefore the CSS proposes that substances with critical hazard properties should be identified and their risks managed also for low and medium tonnages. In addition, all the carcinogens should be identified, and there should now be an obligation to prepare chemical safety reports also in the lowest tonnage band, so 1 to 10 tons. And of course, this has a number of impacts because the CSR requirement would be extended. This basically means that the process will be causing more work, more costs, more testing will be required, and also there will be the need for exposure scenarios and extended safety data sheets for all the substances down to the lowest tonnage band. Then some other proposed changes to information requirements and chemical safety report. This is also something which is pretty important. Each bullet is very important. The first one I have already mentioned for the low volume substances. The registration requirements should be increased to allow better identification of substances with critical hazard properties. The second one is that more information on endocrine disruption should be generated. Third, and this goes a little bit beyond the current safe use objective of the REACH regulation, there is a plan to introduce REACH information requirements on the overall environmental footprint of chemicals. So that's probably something which will be where information will be very difficult to collect for the registrant, especially when the question is about collecting information again from the supply chain. And here we also have the next bullet, which is the amendment of information requirements to REACH on uses and exposure. And here there's now also a serious consideration to create additional obligations for downstream users to provide data related to their uses and exposure to ECHA. So in addition to the registrants, because it has been acknowledged that supply chain communication is not working very well for the purpose of registration. So that is, of course, a topic that may be very controversial. It may have substantial impacts for downstream users. And I would really advise you, and especially the users here online, to follow this activity and the study very closely and provide your views in this regard, because it could have a severe impact. Then on chemical safety assessment, I cannot go much into the detail, but there is the plan to introduce a derived minimal effect level for non-threshold substances like carcinogens and mutagens, and the introduction of mixture assessment factors is planned to take into account co-exposure to several substances with similar properties. This is known as so-called cocktail effect. The last aspect which I want to discuss on the topic of registration is actually related to evaluation. So the an evaluation reform is not explicitly planned under the CSS REACH revision, but now, as we can see from the plans that have been now presented by the Commission, it seems that some significant legal changes are also considered for the evaluation process to support the CSS. The first objective basically is to ensure that registration dossiers are compliant at all times. So basically starting already at the point of submission, and also then making sure that the dossier really remains up to date at all times. So, and to achieve this, there are now terms out there such as the dossier expiration date. ECHA compliance check should be extended to all the registration dossiers. And also an important bullet is the possibility for ECHA to assess compliance already during the dossier submission. So not just the technical completeness, but also make a compliance check already before giving out a registration number. So you may imagine that this may, of course, delay the market access quite significantly. The allowance for the revocation of a registration number is something that was already foreseen in the CSS. So that should be introduced, at least in case of persistent failure to comply. And then we also have some some intentions to ensure a more responsible application of waivers for preparation of registration. Furthermore, in relation to dossier evaluation, the testing proposal process should be simplified. So it should be, for example, the idea is to limit it to animal testing only. And furthermore, on substance evaluation, there are some options discussed, such as in relation to CORAP, because this procedure has been considered as very heavy. So there is the idea to have it replaced with a lighter and more dynamic registry of intentions. In addition, here, ECHA should get more powers. Currently, as you know, substance evaluation is done by the member states. And there's also an idea to extend from risk to hazard-based concerns. Another new tool that is now being proposed is that testing can be done also by authorities. So authorities could commission testing on substances in order to obtain hazard information. And last but not least, something industry will not like so much are fees, which are directly associated with ECHA activities in the context of evaluation, so-called coupling fees, so that industry could then face, for example, when a dossier update is done or something else. So very many changes. This is not even an exhaustive list, and even the Commission is still at a pretty early stage with reflections about which change will be implemented and how. But you see that this could have, of course, a significant impact also on the industry. And with this, and a little bit delay, I'm sorry for that, Steve, but I hand over to you on authorization, restriction, and essential use.
Right, thank you very much, Tim. There's an awful lot of information to digest there, and the same will be true for authorization and restriction as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so the objectives for authorization and restriction reform are stated as reducing the administrative burden on companies and authorities, to free up resources to tackle a wider range of more relevant chemical risks, make the processes more efficient and effective, achieve a higher level of protection of human health and the environment from the risks of the most harmful substances, give clearer signals and more planning security to companies, and to deal with some underlying issues such as complexity of supply chains and uses for widely used chemicals, uncertainties in upstream authorization applications resulting in excessive committee burden and slow decision making. And I've noticed from the registration report for this event that some of my former trade association industry colleagues may recognize some of those issues. Next slide, please. So there's 4 options given to a wide range of stakeholder groups, including some industry, NGO, as well as member state stakeholders. The first one was to keep things as they are. The second, to keep authorization, but clarifying it and simplifying it wherever possible. The third one is to merge the authorization and restriction processes. And finally, to remove the troublesome authorization title from REACH altogether, rather than trying to fix it. Fairly quickly in the process, 2 of the options were ruled out. One click, please. Thank you. So essentially, the focus is either improving authorization with some clarifications on restriction, or merge them. And I'll clarify those 2 now. Next slide, please. First of all, before we go into the details, there is the thing called the candidate list, which currently forms part of the authorization title in REACH today. So today, a listing of a substance of very high concern on the candidate list prompts a number of actions. One is to force disclosure in mixtures via safety data sheets, wherever they are greater than 0.1% weight by weight. Also, to report their use and the safe use information for articles containing them greater than 0.1% weight by weight. And of course, there was the clarification of what that meant in a court ruling back in 2015. Thirdly, as a result of the Waste Framework Directive about 3 years ago, it also forces notification into the substances of concern in products database, which is up and running with ECHA, albeit still very much a work in progress. It is called the candidate list because these are candidates for consideration for Annex 14 listing, that is the authorization list. The criteria to go on the authorization are different, or at least the priority for substances is different, because the second step also considers risks and widespread use, not just hazard. Finally, many companies today will seek to substitute substances of very high concern without any further regulation or restrictions, simply for reputational reasons. And essentially in the consumer retail space, this is often true. So recognizing all these, just putting something on the candidate list has benefits in communication and risk management without further regulation, and thereby stakeholders will wish to keep the candidate list whatever happens in other parts of authorization and restriction. Next slide, please. What's possible and being considered? First of all, today the candidate list will cover carcinogens, mutagens, reprotoxins, VP, VB, and PBT substances, and substances of so-called equivalent concern. It is being considered widening that list to be more explicit around substances of equivalent concern, to explicitly include things like endocrine disruptors, persistent, mobile, and toxic chemicals, very persistent and very mobile chemicals, and chemicals with specific targeted organ toxicity, certain parts of the body. Secondly, what's being considered is recognizing that we do have a CLP regulation where there is a harmonized classification process, that if a substance has a harmonized classification as one of those hazard classes, then it could go more quickly onto the candidate list with very little committee process whatsoever. In other words, the argument has already been had about its hazard status, so just put it on there. Of course, today there's a public consultation process which may be skipped. That public consultation process at the moment is the first opportunity for industry to report their uses and concerns. They're also considering requiring registrants and users of SVHCs to report to ECHA their use at the point of candidate listing, potentially annually, and potentially with fees, on their use of the SVHC, volumes, risk management measures, monitoring, emissions, waste alternative substitution activity. This feels like very much a pick list that may or may not all be true, but this is certainly being considered today. The advantage of this is that the data could be used by ECHA and the Commission to be more informed about the subsequent steps, whether listing in Annex 14, listing in Annex 17, or taking some other risk management step. They think that public consultations could be reduced in scope on the assumption that this information is already available and presumably reasonably complete, whether or not you feel that to be reasonable. The fees could be used to fund ECHA work on substitutes and substitution. And the subsequent authorization and derogation applications could then be based on that information more readily. The better data has already been got, thereby reducing some of the so-called uncertainties in authorizations today. Next slide, please. Since I'm sure that's put a smile on your face already, I'll move on to the main options around authorization. So this is essentially now option one, which is improve authorization. The changes being considered are to pre-notify information on use of volumes, RMMs, etc. at the time of candidate listing, which is what I've just been talking about. Secondly, to reduce the scope of Annex 14 proposal public consultation based on the above information already being received. The third one is for downstream users operating under an authorization to report their use, but also provide a fee annually for continued use, thereby helping to fund ECHA's activities and also to encourage substitution. Next one is to perhaps clarify the granularity about what a use is, clarify information requirements, and to reject non-conforming dossiers after an opportunity to correct them. Now, clarification of what a use is under authorization and what the exact information requirements really are is, of course, one of the areas which has caused problems for a number of years. Then, as an authorization takes effect, there is a current risk that changes to risk management measures, volumes, and the legal entities operating under them may not be known. Thereby, they're thinking about mandatory reporting of such changes. And then they're talking about a system for interested parties to submit information on alternatives for authorized uses, more formally and perhaps in a simpler and clearer way. And finally, to simplify processes for chemicals which are used for essential uses for society, which I'll explain later, and also in low volume cases, though neither of these are explicit in terms of how would it be simpler. Next slide, please. If that authorization simplification option were to be proceeded, then these are the changes being proposed to restrictions under that same option. First of all, the base restriction process, 68 paragraph 1 in REACH, where the burden is on the authorities to demonstrate unacceptable risk, consider the socioeconomic impact and alternatives, and to justify any derogations, that would largely remain the same. The other route, the so-called fast-track route, which is currently used for consumer-related products, especially CMRs today, they're talking about expanding that significantly to fast-track commission-led restrictions. This fast-track route does not have any public consultation. Currently, it is CMRs in consumer use. They're talking about extending that to professional uses, as opposed to industrial uses in a factory. This is professional uses, if it's a plumber or a cleaner or some other occupation like that, and also extending it beyond CMRs to other hazard types, to, for example, endocrine disruptors, etc. Industrial uses aren't affected by 68 paragraph 2 today and would not be under this option. Where derogations are needed under the so-called generic restriction approach, then they would use the essential use concept I'll be speaking about in a little while as a guide for where derogations may be needed. Next slide, please. Option 2. So this is where they are considering combining authorization and restriction. So it would be essentially as per the restriction described in the previous option, plus to extend the generic restriction approach to SVHCs in industrial uses. So fast track restriction, no public consultation, just get on with it for SVHCs. The Commission proposes, under this one, the Commission proposes derogations, and derogations are guided by the essential use concept, information submitted by SVHC registrants and users. So again, the candidate list notification of how am I using this SVHC will be used for this purpose. Industry would be able to apply for generically applicable joint derogations in advance of a restriction date. This would be very much like the process in ROS, the Restriction of Hazardous Substances directive today, where there's an annex of known exceptions where the industry doesn't, the technology does not support substitution today. However, the burden of proof will be on industry, they will be time limited, and derogations will be renewable. For confidential uses or limited individual company cases, there'd be an opportunity for applying for derogations specifically. Those would be rather discouraged because they wouldn't be able to have too many opportunities to manage those in volume. So the idea is that generally industry would work together rather than do their own thing company by company. Clearly, this is a major change, so there will be a transition to change over from the current system. So essentially, the authorization bit of the regulation today would turn into an application for a joint derogation or a individual derogation. In both those cases, burden of proof is on industry, as it is with authorization today, but the generic restriction, the burden would be on the authorities to demonstrate its need. So that's authorization and restriction combined. Next slide, please. My next subject is the so-called essential use concept. Now, this is needed because in the concept of the green transition or circular economy, or the need for rapid modifications to meet the climate change challenge, certainly some chemicals would probably need to be supported irrespective of their chemical hazard or risk. And so the thing is to focus on most harmful chemicals should only be allowed for essential uses. Now, some of this thought process on most harmful chemicals is being led with restrictions on PFAS, and very much PFAS chemicals are being used as a pilot example to test the essential use concept. Essential uses are not today defined. The expectation is that the Montreal Protocol definition will be a starting point for this discussion. So something would be deemed essential if it's essential for health, safety, or the functioning of society. But what is a use? It is unlikely to be the same thing as a sector. So it will be about a particular application for a chemical within a sector, not whether the sector is essential for society. So my favorite example would be, are roller coasters essential for society, or are safety locks on roller coasters essential for health and safety? And it'll be very much the latter. We'll focus on the function at an individual level rather than whether the overall system or sector is needed for society as a whole. This is going to be hard because use structures, as we know from existing experience with things like authorization, is very hard to define. What is a use? How do you subdivide uses? How do you subdivide sectors, etc.? So the best way to think about this is we expect some politically agreed principles of essentiality, maybe some examples. These would have to account for the need to support the green transition, the Fit for 55 agenda, which is the commitment to get EU CO2 emissions down by 55% by 2030, and the circular economy action plan. So some principles would have to be written down and probably politically agreed, probably in a process outside of REACH. Secondly, there'd have to be some sort of process for application. How would I apply those principles? And how would that work as a flowchart, if you like, as a process, including its application to things like restrictions or authorization applications. And thirdly, there'd have to be some sort of committee mechanism to resolve borderline cases. In my view, 95% of society would probably be borderline rather than clear cut. And so there is an awful lot of learning to go as this system develops. That's a personal viewpoint. So there is a study underway which is expected to conclude late 2022. As I said, I don't think the essential use concept will be explicitly part of REACH, but will be used by REACH. It will be used by many other policy and legal developments, such as things like sustainable product initiatives, circular economy action plans, and so on and so forth, beyond REACH. So I suspect the essential use concept to be managed separately. And I think I've finished my section on this before we move on. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Steve. So I can proceed with some conclusions and outlook. So where do we go from here? First of all, I would like to highlight a few upcoming events of interest. So there are indeed various opportunities now for stakeholders to provide relevant input in the coming weeks and months. So I have just highlighted a few here. So on March 3, there is the workshop on essential uses. So was just elaborated by Steve. Then also in early March, still I do not know an exact date, an online workshop on the use and exposure study, which I have flagged to you previously. So that will be something also relevant for many, also downstream users. Then we have two workshops, one on March 21st and another one in June on the generic approach to risk management and how to extend it, so the fast track restrictions. And then we also have a targeted consultation for SMEs in March, April. In addition to that, there are Caracal meetings, so ECHA Commission and the member states together with observers following the REACH revision process and discussing key items. So the next Caracal meeting will be in late March, and at the beginning of April there will also be a joint meeting with the committee for workplace and occupational safety and health on the interface of REACH and OSH, so also important. So you should not miss these opportunities, and also be sure that you coordinate your activities with your sector groups and also maybe with other similar sectors. It's really important that you will identify the studies of this REACH revision project that concern you most and follow them well. And yeah, if not already clear to you, then yes, please participate in the open public consultation until the middle of April. Some high-level summary on the key likely or possible changes to look out for. First of all, for manufacturers and importers of chemicals, I have provided an overview of the extension to the registration requirements. So there will mainly be, of course, for the registrants. And then for the downstream users of chemicals, the main concern might be the possible new reporting obligations to ECHA. So here the scope is really more than open at the moment. Will it be referring to candidate list substances or also other hazardous substances? How will the reporting obligation be looking like? Will it be regular or upon request? What will be the fees? What will be the information requirements? So many questions at the moment out there. All the actors in the supply chains, down to article producers, assemblers, and end users, really have to realize that we will face the introduction of additional hazard classes, and we will see the acceleration of risk management activities now in the context of the authorization and restriction reform. And all of this also could mean an increase of obsolescence risks for products. So even if there would be a continued use case based on the legal provisions, you could still face a commercial obsolescence because main markets are not possible to deliver anymore. Last but not least, please always keep in mind that there's not only the REACH revision, but also other ongoing activities that could be impacting, like the CLP revision, and now also the Sustainable Products Initiative, which is looking to introduce a digital product passport, for example. So yeah, so we are now in the midst of an important year for the REACH revision. We are the REACH revision proposal should be adopted by the end of 2022. As mentioned by Steve, the study on essential uses is a separate topic, but it also feeds into REACH authorization and restriction reform. As you have noticed, the changes are indeed not minor, and they could have actually a quite significant effect, and not only a positive effect on the industry. But all the work that you have already done on alternatives, on substitution, collecting and monitoring and emissions data, this information will not be lost, and you can keep on relying on this work for the future. On our side, how can we help you in this REACH revision project? Well, of course, by things like this webinar, hopefully. We can also help you more on a company level with the assessment of impacts and analysis of changes that may be relevant for your company or industry. We can help you elaborate your position and other input to consultations. Of course, monitor this complex REACH revision process for you and flag relevant consultations and developments, and provide any more tailored consultancy, be it of legal or a technical nature. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention. We are a bit late, but not too much. So with this, I could hand back to Fedi for the questions and answers.
Yes, thank you, Tim. So we received a lot of questions during the webinar, so probably do not have time to go through all of them, and some of them are actually a bit off topic or very specific, so I recommend you contact us separately on those questions. However, let's start with some questions we received ahead of the webinar, and then let's see how many we can take. As Tim mentioned, we're going a bit over time, so 3 minutes to go, but we'll take questions and go over time. So those of you who have to leave, please, you can watch this the recording on YouTube, for example, later on. So first question, and this goes to you, Tim. So question goes as follows. I'm especially interested on the impact of the changes on articles put on the EEA market. So what would be the impacts on articles of this revision?
Yes, well, I've a little bit already indicated what could be the changes as part of my summary, but of course, one of the most important obligations for article suppliers is REACH Article 33, reporting on candidate list substances and articles. And here we understand that the Commission has no plans to revise Article 33. But of course, looking at the possible future role and evolution of the candidate list, we expect that the challenge to comply with Article 33 could further increase due to the acceleration of candidate listing, maybe this dynamic link also with CLP. Also, the grouping approach to substance identification and risk management, it makes Article 33 reporting increasingly difficult. And of course, when we talk about Article 33 today, we always also talk about a skip, because the obligations are closely related. So what's an increasing challenge for Article 33 will also be a challenge for skip. Other than on reporting, yes, well, there could be additional restrictions, especially for consumer articles under this fast-track restriction procedure. And for industrial products, the main possible impact could also be the obsolescence risk, as I already mentioned. So even if the product is allowed, it could still face obsolescence if main markets collapse. And last but not least, there is also the open question whether article suppliers will face additional reporting duties to ECHA in the future. At least in the consultation questionnaire, we have one question addressing this possible requirement as well.
If I may quickly add, producers or manufacturers of articles within the EU are also users of chemicals, and therefore, as downstream users, must comply with exposure scenarios and where registration obligations are being forever widened and the expansion of the scope of exposure scenarios down to the 1 ton range of registrations, that can have an impact directly on downstream users in terms of use compliance.
Thank you, Tim and Steve. Okay, so the next question, definition on essential uses. What are the different positions of the stakeholders? And this, I guess, a question to you, Steve.
Okay, it is very early days on this. I've been involved in some policy debates with various stakeholder groups, including NGOs. What I would say is that I think no one has a real full understanding of the broad uses of chemicals in society. Anyone who thinks they have probably has missed something. It's one of those things where you can never stop learning. Certainly NGOs have very, very strong views on what sort of things should not be allowed. And they use examples. For example, PFAS in fast food packaging. That's a good example. Is why would that be necessary? Are there alternatives to PFAS used on technical clothing for water repellency? They know what they don't like. But turning that into a process that industry can use and authorities can enforce is a completely different ballgame. And that is where the conversation currently is in terms of how to do that. So beyond broad principles and ideas of what people don't like, I don't think I can answer that question at this time.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Then there are 2 questions that I can actually take very quickly. And what has changed in the regulation? So nothing yet. Tim can add information to these replies if you like. And then the next question would be, I would like to know about the consultation about REACH revision, so the 17th of January, and how industries and associations think about that. But I think this was very comprehensively already covered by Tim in the presentation, so I think you will find your answers there. So we'll just go to the next question in the interest of saving a few minutes. The question goes to you, Steve. It's difficult for me to understand the essential use concept and socioeconomic analysis. Does essential use concept come from improvement of authorization scope, for example, adaptation for the authorization list substance in imported articles or polymers? Did you get
the
this?
essential use concept is recognized to be necessary to inform a number of legislative and policy processes, including within REACH for restriction authorization purposes. It is not the same as socioeconomic analysis. I mean, use for the functioning of society is not the same thing as, do I still have jobs? As a purely economic argument. So I do not expect the essential use concept to be a replacement for socioeconomic analysis. But if you have a use which is clearly essential for society and that there's no debate about it, then that is expected to simplify or eliminate the need for a socioeconomic analysis. But please do not think the two are equivalent. They are not. They are different perspectives.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And then a quick one for you, Steve, also. So is this type of REACH revision also planned or ongoing for UK REACH?
The UK authorities have no obligation to maintain UK REACH in lockstep with the EU, none. Of course they are aware of what's going on. Many of the stakeholders working with the UK government, especially NGOs, have a foot in both camps, and of course they have common concerns. Finally, the UK is also a member of the United Nations Environment Programme and its strategic approach to chemicals management. So many of the, if you like, the macro challenges around chemicals are the same. And of course, therefore, they watch developments in the EU with interest, but there is absolutely no commitment to copy them. So I would expect some political difficulties in the UK trying to follow everything perfectly in the EU. There's no political commitment to do that. So are they looking to replicate these changes? Not that I've heard yet, but of course many of the concerns they are trying to address are shared.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, so now we come to some of the questions that were submitted during the webinar using the chat. So the first one, what does it mean by dossier expiration date? Everyone can use it after expiration. I think that is not the case, but Tim, do you want to take this?
Yeah, it's a good question. What it means, I can only speculate that it refers to the requirement to update a registration dossiers in regular intervals, like yearly or every 3 or 5 years, and that if you do not comply with that, then possible registration number will be withdrawn. But I really have to say that we have only limited information at this stage on these topics. The information pretty much relies on one paper that the Commission recently prepared for Caracal. So we have to be careful, and probably not all the considerations and changes are fully understood and elaborated.
Okay, thank you, Tim. The next question related to the revised CLP regulation. So you mentioned earlier in your presentation that a proposal for the revised CLP regulation was expected in the second half of this year. Everything that this person has heard so far indicates that this is expected by end of Q2 this year. So has something changed, or you comment on this?
Well, my latest information is that that the proposal is expected for the second half of 2022. So it is already delayed to quite some extent, because initially the proposal was expected by the end of 21. So now it's going towards the end of 22, like the REACH revision proposal. So, but we have to wait and see. But
thank you. And then the next question, do you have any more information on the possible requirements on environmental footprints? I have not seen yet much discussion on this topic. So I think we've got a few questions on this. So this environmental footprint seems to be an interesting topic. So do you have any more information on the possible requirements?
I don't think I've seen anything specific. Sorry if I may just take this. There seems to be an expectation to help close the circular economy loop by understanding where chemicals end up and how they might affect recycling or end-of-life waste. And there seems to be an interesting idea that registrants are somehow expected to know where their products end up through their downstream supply chains and user bases as part of their registration dossiers. It's probably very early to speculate whether this is a practical idea or where this will end up, but I think it's focused on the chemistry rather than things like CO2 emissions and climate change.
Thank you,
Steve.
We are
really only at the very beginning of a long journey here as regards the information collection on those issues relating to the environmental footprint. So I think there really needs to be a phased approach and not to overburden and over expect from registrants to collect information that they cannot reasonably get. So otherwise, same mistakes will be repeated, which were done for the use collection and exposure collection.
Yes, and this also, I think, answers the question about another question about how does this relate to carbon footprint. So too early to tell, but likely try to keep it somehow manageable, as Tim mentioned. Then the next question, will the cost of these EU REACH revisions be assessed as back in 2008? Will a kind of up-to-date flesher list be established and made available? So maybe a bit too technical for this forum, but please, if you have any information on this or thoughts. Tim?
No, I don't really recall how the cost assessment was done back at the times, and also, I mean, for this time, I do not expect that there is scope for a very in-depth cost impact assessment. I mean, considering all the time constraints, so it's a very ambitious timeline.
Yes.
I expect it to be required to do some sort of cost and impact assessment. Whether they think the existing inception impact assessment is enough or not, I think there'll be a lot of complaints if there isn't a refresh of that. But often these process steps are completed rather faster and perhaps less comprehensively than many stakeholders would like. I mean, the one for the REACH, original REACH was done before things like Article 33 were added into the regulation at the last minute in the co-legislation process. So there's exactly how effective that step is or not, I don't know. The key right now is to get stakeholder views into the consultation now.
Okay, so just a few more questions, and again, apologies for going over time, but I think these are some good questions, and just a few more. So were there any changes proposed to these scientific research and development and PPORD processes? Do you know, Tim?
I have not. I have only read one reference that some clarification is planned now in the frame of the authorization reform when considering the option 1 clarifications to authorization, and so they also want to make some clarifications on the scope of exemptions, including also scientific research and development. But what this clarification would mean, there's no insight into that, so we have to wait how this study is evolving further.
Thank you, Tim. And then the next to last question goes to Steve. So this is directed specifically at you. So the question goes as follows: are you saying that the candidate list will duplicate Annex 6 of the CLP regulation for specific hazard classes, or is it the case that the substance already on the candidate list, but for which there is new information to include additional hazard classes, will be these classes that are fast-tracked? This question may be a bit difficult.
Okay, I think the point is that entry onto the candidate list is based on the hazard of the chemical. If that hazard has already been agreed through a harmonized classification process and entered into Annex 6 of CLP, then the next step to add to the candidate list can be made without public consultation or significant committee consultation or discussion. So it's a fast track that step because the discussion's already been had under CLP. That's all it means.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so the last question, and this probably is my favorite one. So I don't know if there's an answer to this one, but let's take it anyway. So how will companies be expected to maintain compliant dossiers when ECHA changes the goalposts regularly on what it deemed as compliant? So do you have any final thoughts on this?
Very quickly, I would suggest that what ECHA does today is a technical completeness check to say, have you put things in every section of the dossier, rather than an in-depth technical assessment about whether the information is truly complete. The enforcement competence is with the member states today, and of course many stakeholders, especially NGOs, are quite critical of many registration dossiers as being incomplete in some way, though the complexity of those requirements means this is, if you like, a target-rich environment. It's an easy thing to do, to claim something has missed a bit of information and therefore is non-compliant. Where this goes, I'm not sure, but it sounds like it's suggested that ECHA will have do more of a technical judgment as well as a nominal completeness check in the future. We will see.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Tim, for the comprehensive answers. So Tim, next slide, please, and we'll just wrap this up. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. Please let us know if you have any other questions or need support with this REACH revision, understanding it, and any other compliance topics that we've been talking about, and other chemical regulations that we support. So in any case, thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice day, and have a great day, of course. And thank you to my colleagues also. Goodbye.